In this episode of the IT Experts podcast, we answer the question, why would you want to buy another MSP? Welcome to the IT Experts podcast, the only podcast to help MSPs scale to 1 million, and if already there, get to 5 and go faster. At the end of the day, isn't it all about building a business that works for you rather than you for it? I hope you enjoy the show. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the IT Experts podcast. We're on the third of the trilogy with the legend, I'm going to say it now, the veteran legend, as he called it in the last couple of series. So I feel quite comfortable in saying that. Ken Roulston, M&A addict, I'm going to say, M&A MSP addict. Welcome back to the show, Ken.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. I'll certainly take the veteran comment, but I'm not so sure about the legend.
We'll see how we get on. We'll see what feedback we get. Anyway, unless you've been living under a rock recently, the last two episodes of the IT Experts podcast have all been about M&A. They've all been about mergers and acquisitions, buying, selling, using this amazing tool to help you either get out of your MSP, get into another MSP, and work out what the foundations are for when you want to move things forward a little bit quicker. We've had some amazing conversations with Ken over the last couple of weeks and offline as well about his story that you can go back and listen to. I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about that right now as in terms of an intro. But in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the buying process. So 2 episodes ago, we talked about the foundations. What do you need to know when you want to consider buying or selling your MSP? Then we talked last week about the selling process. If you want to sell your MSP, as we hear a lot of MSPs say, yeah, I want to exit one day, but there isn't an actual plan in place to work out what does a good exit look like. And these shows are absolutely, they're gold, right? They're absolutely gold dust. So you need to go back and listen to these. And today we're going to talk about the buying process. But just in case somebody hasn't listened to the last couple of episodes, which they need to do, Ken, who are you? What do you do? And who do you help?
Very good. Yeah, Ken Roulston. I'm, as I say, a veteran of the IT industry, having been involved in the IT services side of things for 45 years. Most recently, in 2009, I started an MSP from scratch and made 6 acquisitions over the next 12 years, culminating in the sale of the business in 2023 at a point when we were up to about 17 million of revenue, 120 staff, and doing about 2 million EBITDA, which is the indicator of profitability that MSPs are valued on. So since I sold the business, I did the obligatory sort of transition stuff with the acquiring company. And I've worked with some vendors, including Kaseya, on their M&A concierge program. And I've been working directly with MSPs, specifically on their own M&A strategy, primarily on the buying side. And I put together, in conjunction with a good colleague of ours, Mark Copeman, put together a website, MSPMNA.com, which will provide a lot more information than perhaps you'll just get out of these particular broadcasts.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about those a little bit. We'll talk about that website and the course and everything that you've got a little bit later on in the show, which is brilliant. I think the first thing I just want to touch in on there, Ken, is that you said you set up an MSP. And I think I recall from our original conversation, you went straight in on a 7-figure, it's £1 million turnover MSP and from scratch, because you didn't want to build it. And I think I thought that was quite funny. That tickled me a little bit because I can't be bothered with doing all of that kind of growing stuff. I'm just going to go straight to buy one and then away we go. Now, for many people, including me to a varying degree on an investment risk, this would just shudder. Borrowing money to buy another company would just shudder most people into their grave, wouldn't it? They wouldn't be able to comprehend it. But for you, this was something like, I need some money for that, so I'm going to go and find some money that's going to help me buy that. Is that your is it as simple as that?
I suppose I had some experience of the whole M&A process back in the 90s when the IT services industry was better known as third-party maintenance or break-fix type maintenance. And I made 5 acquisitions during that period and realized that if you want to grow quickly and if you want to grow your value quickly, organic is just so difficult, because if companies are providing a decent service to their customers, it's very difficult to prize those customers away from their incumbent provider.
Yeah.
So most companies that rely entirely on organic growth will find themselves going maybe 10 to 20% at best per annum, because as well as winning the new business, there's also the risk of losing contracts as well. So it's a slow and it's a steady way maybe of growing your value. And it really, I think personally, it suits those people whose view of a business being a lifestyle rather than
Yeah.
being something that's about creating real value. When I started the MSP, I was 49, and I realized that if I was going to achieve my objective of getting some real value to take me into retirement, that I needed to take the 10 years between 50 and 60 to really build up the value. And just starting organically and trying to grow organically just wasn't going to get me to anywhere near the number. Yeah, it's acquisitions not for everybody. People do fall into different camps. I think that if you have a mindset, an entrepreneurial mindset, a mindset that's based about wanting to maximize the value that's what you're building, you have to, I believe, be prepared to accept debt as a normal means of
Yeah.
financing
Yeah.
that growth. And also, and this becomes maybe more relevant down the road, you have to be prepared to also accept potentially some dilution in equity and hence control of the business. Because if you're not fortunate enough to have a deep of cash to support your acquisition strategy, you may well find yourself at a point in time whereby you've got to dilute in order to get that investment that you
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
So I do think that you have to have that not risk averse attitude, but more willing to take acceptable and sensible risks as a mechanism to grow. But of course, that means it's not for everybody, and I'm not suggesting that everybody should do
No.
it.
No.
But if your intention is to grow real value out of your business, particularly if you have a goal of trying to exit within 5 to 10 years, then it's the best way to do it, I believe.
Absolutely. And I think go back and listen to the last two episodes because there were some real key points and key fundamentals in there around what you need to be able to be comfortable with that risk. And one thing that you said in the last couple of shows, I've probably repeated it in each show, is that until your MSP is ready to sell, you should not really buy another MSP.
Yeah, this kind of sounds confusing. The rationale behind that statement is that, as I say, if you're not in the fortunate position to have access to significant cash to be able to fund an acquisition strategy, the reality is you're going to have to go out and borrow it. And if you're going to go out and borrow it, whether it be from a bank, a private investor, or some other debt funder, you will be required to go through a process of demonstrating to that potential funder that your business is run, that effectively you've got a clear view of where you're going in the future. And so, to a large degree, you're selling your vision, your strategy,
Yeah.
and you're selling your business. Even though there may be no equity exchange, you're having to, in essence, sell that vision, in order to attract the funding. So that means you've got to get your house in order. You've got to get your contracts in place. You've got to get your systems. You've got to get your structure, everything in place to be able to demonstrate to any potential lender that you have the capability and capacity to take on board an acquisition and make it work. Because, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this later, buying a business is challenging, but integrating a business and making it successful is really difficult. And that's the bit that sometimes the lenders are more conscious of. If somebody has not done it before, are they going to make it work or
Mhm.
not? And if they can't make it work, then there's a risk to their investment. So, yeah, it's a strange way to put it. But yeah, my view is if you're wanting to buy, you have to be in the right shape effectively to sell,
To enable you to
first of
sell.
all.
Brilliant. And I think it's just a point, just to before we get to the next question, that this episode is to provoke your thoughts, and all these episodes are to provoke your thoughts, and they're by no means any advice that we're giving you to go and get into debt or do a certain thing around MSPs and funding and risk and all of that kind of good stuff.
We should probably have a wee strap line along the bottom that
Yeah, we
says
should.
that this episode comes with a health and financial warning.
Yeah, we might as well swear as well and chuck a few swear words in just to get them all in their place. The reason I just said that is because, Ken, I'd love to know, with everything that's going on in the world right now, and there's always going to be something going on in the world right now, so it's probably a bit of a rhetorical question. Where's your view on the economical market in the next kind of 3 to 5 years? Is it going to be a good place for MSPs? Is it going to be, because what I'm seeing at the minute is I'm seeing you've got obviously a good chunk of the market are 40, 50 something, maybe even older than that, MSP owners who have grown up running these businesses for 20 years, whatever it might be. And you've also got now a lot of younger MSP business owners who have a very different view on how they should be run, their appetite to AI, risk, and all of this kind of stuff. Even communication. It's like some people, younger people, they don't even want to talk to people. Can you believe that? They just use their phones for messaging. Oh my word, how old am I? So we've got a real different types of owners through the space. We've got different stuff going on with the economy. Is this a good time to be an MSP? Is it a good time to think about strategies like this, or what's your kind of view on it?
To go back to your comment about is this a good time or a bad time? When I started my business in 2009, for those of us who remember being around, that was
Yeah.
center of the financial crisis. And a lot of people said to me at that time, are you mad starting a
Yeah.
business in the middle of a financial crisis? But it actually worked for me because it was an opportunity to acquire businesses at a relatively sensible value at that point in
Yes.
time because the market conditions were challenging. So it's like everything in life. You can look at these things from two sides. Is it an opportunity or is it a problem? And I think the MSP industry is still in a sufficiently good state. There's still plenty of money coming into the sector, primarily through private equity players at the upper end of
Mm.
the marketplace. There is an increasing requirement for the service that MSPs provide because businesses are increasingly day by day reliant on their IT. They want it to be reliable. They want it to work for them basically around the clock, no matter
Mm-hmm.
where they are. So IT needs to be totally available and it also needs to be totally secure with all the threats of cybersecurity and so on. So there is a constant and increasing demand for MSP services. There is potentially also a movement of mid-sized companies moving their IT requirements outside of their business because it's so difficult to attract and retain in-house resource, which is an increasing opportunity for the MSP marketplace. So I think there's a lot of good logic behind the fact that the marketplace isn't going
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
AI is going to change it, of course, over
Yeah.
the next number of years. How MSPs are run and how they manage their customers and their staff is going to change, but the demand won't go away.
Yeah.
Now, you're right in that the marketplace has seen a significant amount of consolidation over the last number of years, particularly in that mid-ground arena as the bigger players have been buying the mid-sized companies. But there is probably more MSPs now than there was 5 years ago because of the number of new entrants into the
Mm-hmm.
marketplace who are probably relatively small at this stage and are starting up because they're attracted to the potential of this marketplace and they see the opportunity for growth. But it's going to get very challenging, I think, over the next 3 to 5 years for those smaller companies to continue to thrive because the bigger players will have the breadth and depth of capability that the customers are going to be looking for. They're also going to be able to apply their competitive pressure on the marketplace. So I have a feeling that what's the old saying in marketing saying, get big, get niche, or get out.
Yeah.
And I do think that if you're a relatively small MSP and want to stay relatively small, you're best to probably focus on a niche,
Yeah.
whether it be a vertical market or a geography or something else that's your USP. But I think otherwise, the whole strategy should be about getting big and
Yeah.
getting big as quickly as possible so that you can compete with these larger players down the road.
Excellent stuff. And as we say, build value into your business that's in a really good autonomous state that's profitable and is going to be attractive when the day comes when you do decide to sell. But we've whet their appetite. They're all excited. They're all sitting there at the end of this podcast going, okay, I'm going to go and buy an MSP. Let's do this. Let's do this. And I can think of certain people right now who used to work within the Growth Hub who would be doing exactly just that. Chris, I'm going to say, you know who you are. So good morning to you. And how do we find the right MSP? How do we target the right MSPs? Do we have to go out and ring people up? Is there brokers that can help us with it? Where do you start?
Yeah, it's multifaceted in terms of the approach to the marketplace. I was fortunate enough in that all but one of the acquisitions that we made came as a result of networking and
Yep.
going to events, talking to people, leveraging vendor relationships by putting out there, I'm interested in acquiring a company. Do you know of anybody who
Right.
might be interested
Yeah.
in selling? So, that's one of the best ways of doing it, in that you have the opportunity to potentially engage with a company off market, a company that effectively is not going to be competing you as a potential buyer with
Yeah.
other buyers, and therefore possibly getting a good or a better deal. That's, to a degree, there's an element of fate involved in that, and that can't necessarily be totally relied on. Of course, then there's brokers in the marketplace in many respects, like recruitment agents. They are a double-edged sword to many people. Yes, there are a number of brokers who are there on behalf of sellers that have access to companies that are interested in selling, but are obviously trying to do it under the radar so that
Yeah.
they're not exposing their strategy to competitors who may go after their customers or might go after their staff.
Yeah.
So, of course, that's another viable route to do it. There is, of course, the old basic technique of just cold calling, but I find that to be very difficult to ring up a business and say, look, I want to talk to the owner of the
Yeah.
business. And they say, what do you want to talk about? And you say, well, I've got a really wonderful opportunity for them. And in which case the phone goes down and you never hear
Yeah.
again. I've tried LinkedIn, and sometimes that can work as well. One strategy that I used to use, and I'm actually advocating at the moment on behalf of one of my clients, is to use their accountants to make contact with the accountants who are the representative of potentially a company you're
Interesting.
interested
Yeah.
in acquiring. So that if you identify a number of companies, for talk's sake, that you believe based on their size, profile, location, etc., would be a good fit for you, and you're struggling to get in contact with them any other way, if you use your accountant to contact their accountant, they're honor bound to bring that to the attention of their client, and at least then potentially short circuit the whole process of trying to get through that
Yeah.
gatekeeper.
Yeah.
So it's an old way of doing it in many respects. It's how I would have done the acquisitions back in the 90s. But I think that, again, using the snail mail of an actual physical letter from accountant to accountant also has got the ability of breaking through that electronic
Yeah. Yeah.
barrier where I could go
Yeah.
into spam filters and so on. So a letter from an accountant to another accountant, I believe, may have the ability to unlock some of those potentials,
So there's lots of
opportunities.
opportunities there to go and find the right one. And in the
Yeah,
last episode, we were talking about selling, and obviously we were talking about due diligence and everything that was important then. But right now, say we found an MSP that we want to go and move towards in terms of, are we going to be a good fit, etc., etc. This due diligence is possibly even more important than when you're selling, isn't it? Because you really need, this is like the pre-inspection on the car, isn't it, before
yeah,
anything goes off. Who does that? How does this process work? What do you need to look out for? Is there kind of red flags and stuff? Or
yeah.
I know
I
that's a
think there's
massive question, Ken, and
no,
probably
it is. And if I take it back a step, I believe there's four pillars to deciding whether or not it's going to be a good fit.
okay, cool,
There is a strategic pillar, which will this acquisition add something to the business strategically in terms of geography, market share, skills, management experience. Is there something strategic that the acquisition is going to bring to the table? There's a second component, which I would say is technical, which is where the business you're looking at a business that's going to complement where
yeah,
you are positioned, and whether you be a Microsoft house or an Amazon house or a Google house. Do you want to stay within that same technology platform, and do you want to just develop and strengthen that more, or do you want to complement it with a different platform? Are you bringing skills into the table, maybe in terms of Azure that you don't have, that you want to get into more into that hosting side, which is obviously the direction that the marketplace is moving towards, public hosting? Is it bringing in AI skills? So there's also potentially within that the stack of solutions that you're using for delivering the services, because it should be, in theory, much easier to acquire a business that's using a similar stack, whether that be your PSA product, your RMM, your end user sort of protection solutions. So I think if you can get a company that's got that right or similar sort of stack as what you have, it should, say, in theory, make
A
it
bit
easier
easy.
to integrate
Yeah.
afterwards. There's, of course, the financial aspect of it. The financial aspect of it needs to be something that's going to be a 1+1=3 situation in terms of putting the two businesses together through synergies, through additional market opportunities, is going to allow you to grow your bottom line, which is what it's all about. And then the last piece, which is the piece which is the most difficult to get right, but also the bit that if you don't get it right is more likely to cause the integration not to work. And that's the cultural piece, which is
Right.
all about share. Do you have the same values as the company you're acquiring in terms of how they treat their customers, how they treat their staff, how they run their business on a day to day? And that is a challenging piece to get right, and one of the hardest things to do from a due diligence viewpoint. But due diligence can fall into a lot of different categories. I think I was up to in the series that I do online, I think there's about 7 different variations of it. But most of the due diligence you can do using in-house resources. But the two where you really have to outsource is the legal and the financial
Right.
aspects of it. Legal, fairly obvious. Very few companies have an internal resource that is a legal expert. And you've got to get the legalities of it right. It's a bit like the example you're saying, you're buying a car, it might be totally roadworthy and so on. But if the person that you're buying the car from doesn't actually own the car, then you've got a problem down the road. So you've got to get the legal bit right, and that's important. Financial, I'm saying you need to outsource that. Only, again, if you're a relatively small MSP and you're acquiring, you're likely to have some in-house capability financially, but you may not have the right level of in-house skill that is required to do a full and in-depth due diligence on a company, because you've got to go very deep and you've got to go back a number of years. And it's not something that every accountant is capable of doing or has done before. So I certainly encourage, recommend bringing in experts who can help with that
Yeah.
process on those two areas. Of course, and I would say this, I do believe that if in particular you're doing one for the first time, it's good to have somebody on board, somebody like me, somebody who's been there, done it before,
Yeah.
wore the t-shirt, got the scars on the back, and knows effectively how you need to get
Yeah.
through it, at least on the first time, possibly the second, and then it becomes a lot easier to do yourself once you've understood and been through it once or twice. But from a technical due diligence viewpoint, or the HR aspect of it, or other operational side of it, a lot of that you can do, largely speaking, using your own internal resources. But it is a challenging process. It is perhaps, and I believe certainly more difficult for the seller than the buyer in terms of pulling the information together. But it is something that has to be approached professionally and has to be done in a proper, detailed, and structured way. Because otherwise, you could end up with all sorts of issues coming out of the woodwork down the road, as I've had issues with things like dilapidations or pensions or contracts that are not properly written and in place to lock the customers in. So
Yeah.
there are all sorts of issues you can face if you don't approach and run the process properly.
I can imagine it actually being quite an emotional journey. It's probably going to be a bit like buying a house, if not worse than that, isn't it? Is it working? Is that not working? And then you move in, and then you realise you've got a bloody great hole in the roof, and it's hang on a minute, that didn't come
Yeah.
up on the survey, isn't it? You wouldn't go and buy a house without a survey, and I know that.
And there's a lot of similarities,
Yeah.
whether it's a
Mhm.
pre-inspection check in a car or it's a house survey. It's the same sort of thing, but obviously to a much greater level of
Yeah.
depth
Yeah.
than just either of those other two things.
Absolutely. I think we've just got to touch on one more subject before we bring this in for a bit of a close. Is around integration, and you're a big, massive element of the program that you've designed around integration and getting this right, because it's all very well and good finding the money, doing the due diligence, finding the right company, away you go, and then day one, you open up the door. There's a whole load of new people sitting there. There's a whole load of new clients ringing up that you didn't speak to before. I know it's not quite like this, but it can sometimes be a bit rabbit in the headlights. But this integration piece is key, isn't it? Because this is where your clients stay or leave. Your employees can stay or leave. It can be a really difficult time. What's some of your top tips or frameworks or whatever around how to integrate, or what are some of the key things to learn around integration?
Okay, first of all, you have to realize when you're buying an MSP, you're buying a services business, and a services business is very dependent on your staff and, of course, on your customers. So you've got to have in mind from day one that you've got to change a lot of what your mentality is to ensure that those customers and staff that you're bringing on board feel valued.
Yeah.
And that can be easier said than done. What I would have done before is I would have applied to a degree an 80-20 rule to the customers and to the staff to a degree, and try to figure out from a customer viewpoint, where do you need to put your personal resources as the owner of the business into the equation and get in front of the sort of top customers that are generating perhaps 80% of the revenue of the company that you're acquiring, and get in front of them and explain your vision and your values as quickly as possible and be seen to be available to them at any given point in time thereafter. So get in front of the top customers, and I say applying the 80-20 rule to the revenues is a good way of doing that. With the staff, of course, it's slightly different, but staff in a company that you acquire will probably fall into three categories. There is those staff that you absolutely have to keep on board because they are vital to the customer relationships, or they are vital to the business integration process in that they are going to be promoters and advocates of it. There's then going to be a group of staff who are you want to keep on board because they do a good job and they provide a good service, and they're the troops that are the core of the business. But you will find, and I've always found, that there will be some staff for whatever reason don't like the idea that they've been acquired, and maybe they see the company that they're involved in getting too big and that they're losing their maybe degree of influence, or they don't like the fact that a bigger company tends to bring more structured processes and systems to play than perhaps when you're very small, you can be running relatively informally. And you need to work on those staff and try and, if you believe that they are staff that you ultimately want to keep, you got to work very closely to try and convince them of the fact that you will be a good provider to them. But in both cases, I believe the key thing is about communication. It's about constant and regular communication, particularly in the first 3 to 6 months post acquisition. You've got to be constantly speaking to your customers and to your staff, reassuring them and updating them on changes that you're making to the business or to the structure of the processes that you're operating, etc. I think it's about communication with both your customers and your staff. Other things like the financials and the systems and all of the bits that go with it, they will all fall into place provided you've got the right project plan in place to deal with it. But if you risk, the biggest risk to the integration and therefore the acquisition working is if you don't communicate with those two groups of people.
Yeah, because I'm guessing as an owner, you're coming up to I want to buy another business and everything. As soon as you make that decision that I want to buy another MSP and really drive this forward, your role must change in that organisation radically, mustn't it? Whereas you might have been, 25% working in it and then 75% working on it sort of thing. It's going to be 100% completely strategic role. Does it change that quickly?
I think it's wrong to be removing yourself from the day-to-day business entirely, either during the pre-completion process or indeed afterwards. Because if you take your eye off the mothership of your key business too much, there is a danger that it starts to wobble. And if it starts to wobble, when it comes to the completion stage, then you're going to be adding a new business on top of something that's already shaking. I don't think that you want to remove yourself entirely from the business, but what
Okay.
you do need to have
Mm.
is a good group of people around you that are capable of doing the vast majority
Yeah.
of the day-to-day running of the core business, whilst you are spending time on the acquisition
Mm.
process, either pre or post completion. So, yeah, it will distract you. There's no doubt about that. So, if you go into the process and you're trying to do both things at the same time to the same degree, something will fall by the wayside,
Mm.
either
Yeah.
your core business or the acquisition. So, yep, it's absolutely important to get your management structure before you go too far into the process. You can do some of the stuff in the early stages, but once you hit DD, you need to be a lot more available. And of course, post completion, you need to be, as you say, 75, 80%
Yeah.
at least on the new business for a
Brilliant.
period of time.
Love it. Thank you, Ken. Again, the third pillar of this trilogy, the M&A Mastery podcast mini series. Ken, what's your kind of final thoughts on this one here? If any MSPs are out there right now thinking, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to dip my toe and have a look to see if we can really accelerate that growth by buying another MSP. What are the 2 or 3 things they need to do straight off the bat?
I think the very first thing is that every MSP owner should set themselves a 5 or 10 year objective as
Yeah.
to what sort of value they want their business to be at those points in time.
Nice.
Not necessarily with a view that they would sell, but they potentially have the option to sell at that
Mhm.
stage. They have choice. And then work back from that figure to where they are today, and then figure out how are they going to get from A to B. Now, if they can do it organically and they don't need to go down the acquisition route, then great. But if their business is currently worth, let's say, 250,000, and their goal is to get it to 1 million, that's not going to happen organically in
Yeah.
5 years, and
Yeah.
probably not even in 10 years. So you're going to
Mm.
have to look at acquisition. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, I would say, is that you need to be sensible, particularly with the first one, and not go too mad in terms of trying to acquire something that is too big.
Yeah.
So my strategy was always to look at a business that was about half of my current size,
Okay.
so that it was small enough to be manageable enough, but it was also big enough to move the needle to some degree.
Yeah.
So if you're acquiring something that's the same size as you are already and you haven't done it before, that is very challenging. But by the same token, if you're going to acquire something that's maybe 5 or 10% of your current size, the amount of effort and distraction and deal costs involved might be prohibitive and not worth it
Yeah.
for what you're
Yeah.
doing. So I tend to think that your first one should be 25 to 50% of where your current size is at. So first of all, you need to work out where is your
Yeah.
current value set at. And again, the website that I have and the previous podcast will provide some information in that regard, but work on that business. And of course, the third thing is be willing to take on
Mm.
debt. If you're not willing to take on debt to finance it, you're going to struggle mentally with the whole process. And the last thing you want to be doing is worrying constantly about the financial implications of it when you've got so much else to do. And bring in, of course, people that can help you legally, financially, or as I say, advisors who can just walk you through at least the first or two transactions that you're involved in.
Brilliant. Thanks again for all your insights into this very interesting topic that I know that everybody's very interested in. Talk to us quickly just about how people can A, get in contact with you, and B, about the MSPM&A.com. I think they've got that, this little venture you've got going on with our great friend Mark Copeman.
Yeah. Mark heard me speak at a number of events and suggested that we should put together a video program of my experiences, and it ends up being about an 8 hour program that covers all aspects of it, with a lot more war
Yeah.
stories and more tips involved in it. So it's an 8 hour program, but what we're doing, and hopefully by the time this podcast is actually going live, is that we're expanding the website that it sits on into a wider resource for companies in the MSP M&A space, with information on how to bring in other people who can add value, like Growth Habits, Mark's Business Wingman, etc., who can all add some tangible value to a
Yeah.
business in either the buying or selling stage. But also, we're hoping to introduce a matchmaking service. So it's where potential companies who are interested in buying can register their information, and those who are willing to or wanting to sell can register their information, and the information will be stored very securely, particularly on the seller side. And we can do a bit of matchmaking for them
Cool.
at no cost to either party, which is an advantage. So it's all about trying to help MSPs to understand what's involved in M&A from a buying or selling perspective to a greater degree than we've been able to cover in this series of podcasts, but also just adding value to the sector in general.
Great stuff. We'll put all the links to that in the show notes, which will sit on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, and all of that's going to be on the website as well. Or we can get hold of you on LinkedIn, Ken. Is that right?
LinkedIn, or I will have the ken@mspmna.com email address in place by the time this is live. So I've contacted through that as well.
Thanks once again. We've chewed up probably 3 hours of your time putting all of this together, which has been absolutely brilliant, really insightful. Loved every minute of it, Ken. I know the MSPs are going as well. So good luck with everything that you and Mark are up to with your venture there. And good luck to any MSPs out there who are looking at using M&A to speed up their results. I look forward to catching up with you real soon, Ken. You take care. See you soon.
Goodbye. Yeah. Goodbye, everyone.
Just before you go, and if you're curious about how this episode links with the ability to scale your MSP to $1 million, or if you're already there, accelerate to 5, then we want to invite you to come and take the MSP Mastery quiz. And in just 3 minutes, you're going to get a 360-degree scan of your business where you can identify the 1 or 2 tactics that can help you find more time, engage and align your people, and help generate more leads in your MSP. It's really simple. Just click on the link in the show notes. And if you have enjoyed this episode, we'd love to get some feedback from you by means of a rating and review on Spotify or iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. We really appreciate every single one of them. Now you can go and enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to catching up and connecting with you soon. All the best now.